So welcome to the event today. We're going to talk about supporting autistic students during the transition into employment. And the event was promoted as being for careers advisors. But really, it's open to anyone who is interested in supporting autistic students at university, and we just happen to be looking particularly at the phase where the student comes to the end of their study and looks into what they could do next, what kind of graduate job they could go into, and how they can increase and develop their employability. But yes, as I said, there might be some people here today who are not careers advisors, and that's perfectly fine. And I hope you all find the day interesting. So let's start. So this is me. You've already seen a picture. You've obviously seen the video. This is me on picture wearing the same shirt as I'm wearing today. It's my presentation shirt. So just a little bit of housekeeping. As I said, the meeting is recorded, so you might be recognizable in the recording if you put your camera on. And if you're not happy with that, please turn the camera off. Also, please turn your microphone off while the talk is going on. There will be options to ask questions and to have conversations. And then, of course, you can turn your microphone on. But if there's anything that you would like to raise, then please use the virtual hand that Teams offers. And we have some people keeping an eye on the chat and keeping an eye on the settings, and we will then get back to you. If you have any connection issues, please turn your video off, because that can help. And in general, it might be useful just for visual distraction to keep your video turned off anyway while the talk is going on. The chat is open. There are a lot of people here, and what I find if there are a lot of people in the meeting is that the chat can often get very confusing and complex. So if you feel that it's not for you, and if there's so many messages going on, there's absolutely no obligation to keep track of what's going on in the chat. It's only if you want to make some comments. The chat is something else that we will download after the event and look through it just as a record of the event. But you don't need to follow it. And if it's a bit overwhelming, just don't look at it and turn it off in your Teams interface. I'm planning to put some breakout rooms together during the break, because we have 2 15-minute breaks in the schedule. And I always find it quite useful to have a chat with people at an event. But with now 63 of us, if we all chatted together, I don't think that would work very well. So what I'll do is Teams lets me randomly assign people to breakout rooms. And when we get to the first break, I'm going to have a look at how many attendees we have. And I'll see whether I can get maybe 6, 7, 8 people in a room. So you'll be randomly put in a room during the chat. You can just turn your camera and your microphone off if you'd rather have a cup of tea and not do anything for those 15 minutes, or you can have a conversation with the people that you've been put in the room together. I hope that is fine. But as I said, there's no obligation, and you can just do what you like. Have a second breakfast maybe. And the final thing is, I've opened the lobby. You can rejoin the meeting at any time. So if you get disconnected or there's something else that you need to do quickly, just rejoin us, and that's perfectly fine as well. So I hope I've covered everything, and we can start with the proceedings of the day. So we have a program, and I'm really excited about this program because it's a really nice mixture of things that have to do with the image project, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in a minute. So we have speakers who are involved in the image project, but we also have quite a few of speakers who were not directly involved. They may have contributed in some shape or form, but really what they're doing today is talk about their own experience of autism, of supporting autistic students and graduates. And so I think it's a really nice balance between the perhaps sometimes a little dry reporting of what we've done in the project, and then that's complemented by people talking about their own experiences, which put things into context, but also adds a bit of life to it. So that's what we can look forward to today. Right, just a little bit of an introduction. I presume that you know a little bit about autism. There are lots of numbers and figures flying around, statistics. 1 in 100 people is on the autism spectrum. If you look at another statistic, then it's more like 1 in 68 people. It doesn't really matter so much what the exact number is. I think what matters is that there are students at university and graduates who want to go into a job who would either identify themselves as being autistic or have a diagnosis of autism. And really what that means for us from a project, from the image point of view, how we approach that is that we're looking at people's strengths, their preferences, things that they might have some challenges with, and also things that that are, I wouldn't say, well, I'm saying typical, but there isn't such thing as a typical autistic person or a typical autistic trait. There were certain patterns that we've identified. So one of the things that I like to start with is not a definition of autism, but more our view of what autism might manifest itself as. And I look at it as having strengths in some areas and difficulties in others. And arguably, you can say that that applies to every one of us. And what we found was that for autistic people or autistic students who we mostly work with, there is something perhaps that they're unusually good or unexpectedly good at some things and unexpectedly challenged by other things. And that's perhaps as far as I would go with the definition, that there are universities out there and they have certain ways of going about things, and they make assumptions about the students who study at these universities. And if some student comes along who's unexpectedly good at some things, that is generally considered a good thing, but that cannot cause some problems because the system is not necessarily designed for that. And the same is true at the other end of the of that spectrum of preferences and abilities, where someone is unexpectedly challenged by procedures, by interactions, by things that happen at university. A lot of people are not prepared for that. And that usually then is to the detriment of that individual. And it doesn't have to be. So in the image project, that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at the preferences and the strengths that people have and the things that they might be challenged with, which the university doesn't necessarily expect or is prepared for. This is a slide that I've put together after doing a talk at Oxford University, where I was invited to talk to an event where a lot of technical people who work in support roles in Oxford and in Cambridge came together. And I had a few of these strengths on a slide, and then people came to me afterwards, and it just so happened that there were quite a lot of autistic people in the audience, and they said they really identified with it, and they gave me some other ideas as well of the kind of things that they liked and that they considered personal strengths. And there's another logo at the bottom, the Autism and Uni project. So this is really a collection of the kind of strengths that we found present in a lot of autistic people throughout the last, what is it now, 7 or 8 years of researching into this. And I like to put this up because it just shows that these are all abilities and strengths that some people feel that they have. And when we look at this, these are actually strengths that are really desirable in a student and also in an employee. And that's what we want to build in. build on. And that's what the image project really tries to do: identify the strengths, help people become aware of them, and advocate for themselves really effectively, so that these are not overlooked and not forgotten. Right, a few more numbers, and the first one is from a statistic. It's one of these boring ones, where we look at the entrance to higher education in the UK who declared autism. And the last figure I had, I think there's probably a new one out now, is from 2017. But it's really more about the trend. So 0.6% of people who started university declared that they had an autism diagnosis. And that number is steadily rising. But I think the point I want to make is that there's another box. When you start university and you fill in the UCAS form, there's a box for what kind of disability do you identify with. And then there's a box at the end of that list that says if you have multiple disabilities, tick here. And it's a really catch-all, and it's really misleading, that box, because anyone who ticks that box and who's autistic is not covered in the statistics. What we can see is that there's actually 1.3. That's more than twice the number of people who declare an autism diagnosis. And it just so happens that autism often comes with other comorbidities or other difficulties that are on that list of disabilities. So I think the real number of autistic people who go into university is much higher than what the statistics suggest. And it makes it even more important for us to consider how can these students be supported, and how can we get the best for them and out of them. Another statistic, and Karen will know this, I hope I got the figure right, 53% of graduates are not in full-time employment. If we look at the whole of employment, also part-time, the figure is even worse, but 53% of autistic graduates just don't get into full-time employment 6 months after graduation. And the same is true in other countries. So this is the full-time employment rate for the whole population of autistic people. And we see that it's pretty low. And it's not just about someone being in some full-time employment. I think the real issue here, and perhaps in a way this is quite sad, is that students or graduates who come out of university who have had a really good experience at university, hopefully, finished their degree, they're highly qualified, and they just don't get the job that they deserve and that the abilities that they have would normally lead them to. So there are three issues there. One is that the job that they get into is actually not consistent with what they've learned at university and the skills that they have. The second issue is that they might be in a job that is relevant to their studies, but they're not at the level that they should be, or they're not working full time. And the other thing that came up is that the higher the education level, so a lot of autistic students tend to like the idea of doing research, and then they might go on to do a master's or a PhD, but actually the higher the education level, the lower the prospects of employment afterwards. So there are a number of different issues here to address, and it all comes down to this transition from university into employment. How can the skills and the abilities and the dreams of people, how can they be realized when they come into the workplace and when they look for their first job? Right, and there's also a financial or societal issue here, that there's a statistic saying if someone could work but doesn't work for whatever reason, there's a $1 million cost to that over a lifetime. And really, this can be avoided, and the Image Project has hopefully done some things and is working on avoiding some of these personal disappointments of someone going to university, doing a degree, and not finding the job afterwards. Right, so which brings me to the Image Project. I've got 10 minutes left to talk about this. So the chapter is improving employability for autistic graduates across Europe, and it says on the table, particularly And this project is funded by Erasmus, which has to do with education. Therefore, our focus was on the university. And that's why you're here today, because our main target group really was amongst, apart from the autistic students themselves, the main target group was careers advanced. A lot of information on here, but what I want to point out is that we have identified a few issues, and that's that list. I'm not going to go into detail because there are other speakers later on who will talk about this. But what we wanted to do was create some resources and some tools for different people who are involved in the support of autistic students and graduates, and for the students and graduates themselves. We've been doing
Mark,
that through.
I'm struggling to hear you. There's some garbling going on with your sound.
Oh, I'm sorry. That might be my connection. Is it better now? Can you hear me now?
No, possibly you've got two mics on.
Right. Let me just do this. Is this better now?
Still not great. Try the other one.
It may well be my connection because I don't have anything else running here. I'm going to continue and see, and hopefully people can get the gist of it. So one thing I wanted to point out is a strong participatory ethos in the project, where we involved all the different people who we wanted to create resources for in the design of these resources. We have a number of different partners, and I'd like to thank them all for the hard work that they've done. So it's 5 universities. Fitzpatrick, where I'm from, Helsinki University. There's the Free University of Amsterdam, where Mitzi is from, who we've just heard. Medical School Berlin in Germany, and I believe there are some people from Germany who have joined us today.
Mark, we really can't hear you. It's completely garbled. You might try taking your telephone off of your home Wi-Fi network and just using your sort of telephone Wi-Fi for the sound. That sometimes helps.
Right. That will take some time to switch over. Let me check. Right. Is this any better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, good. Right. So I was just thanking the project partners, and the final one is the University of Toulouse. There is a context to this. There was a predecessor project, the Autism at Uni project, which looked at the transition into university. And for this particular project, we've picked up for that and looked at the transition out of university.
Mark, it's gone metallic now. Oh, I am so sorry. May I ask if people can hear me?
Yeah, very clearly.
Okay. Then I could maybe go over the little bit about who our partners are on the project while Mark gets everything set up. if that's okay with Mark, because I think there probably is a connection issue. He might need to turn his Wi-Fi router on and off and that kind of thing. So I know that you weren't able to hear who our partners were and sort of how everything worked. The important thing that Mark was saying is that throughout the project, we've been working with autistic people. And that includes people who work for universities, who are, involved with the partners themselves directly, and also other people from organizations of autistic people and individuals who came to us. We talked to a lot of students. We talked to a lot of careers advisors, also with employers and with other people at universities who provide some careers advice, like heads of courses, administrators, because, every university, it's a little bit different who provides that kind of information. And so we wanted to make sure that we had as much input from every direction as we could possibly get. And also we were working across Europe. We had multiple different partners. We worked with the University of Helsinki in Finland. We worked with my university in the Netherlands. You can tell I'm not Dutch, but I work at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, which, needed some work on this project. We worked with Medical School Berlin. We worked with Université Fédérale in Toulouse, which is in France, and of course with Leeds Beckett. And that was a real bonus because every country runs their services differently. There are different views about autism among autistic people themselves in different countries. So we got to have a lot of debates about what kind of terminology was the right thing to use and, what we needed to do in general. With these 5 universities, we were able to reach out to a lot of people. So we had an online survey. Our online survey captured views from people across the whole range: students, graduates, careers advisors, academics, higher education managers, and also employers. And then we did in-depth interviews with a lot of people. And I always find that you get so much more from those. We also did a lot of exercises ourselves where we were having a meeting at the different partner sites and bringing all that information together and kind of discussing it with each other, often with special guests involved, people from autistic people's organizations who helped us to kind of decide what were the most important things to include in the training package and in the guides, because we have these good practice guides, which Mark is going to tell you more about. Let's see if his voice is working.
Yeah, can I just ask, I think I know there was some update going on in the background, and it's just stopped. So can you still see the slide?
Yes, everything's looking good and you're sounding much better.
Okay, brilliant. So Mitzi already talked about the research that we've done. There was a second phase of research, and where we ran some workshops in 12 different workshops in 5 countries. And this was really an attempt to confirm and validate and further develop all the data and the findings that we had from the more traditional survey and interview research. And really, these are some of the highlights or the headlines that came out of it. I'm just going to focus on the Careers Advisor tab. So what Careers Advisors told us was that often there's a lack of real deep understanding of autism. Many people have an awareness, but what it actually means in practice in terms of how an autistic people can best be supported is not always so clear. I think there's also an issue with a lot of the materials that are used are generic, and they're not customized for different student groups. So there are probably some issues in the system in how universities approach this, and as you can see from the other headlines here, there are different challenges at different phases of the journey that an autistic student goes through, and there may also be challenges that are specific to individual people. So we'll go back to this later when we talk about the outputs that we've created. A very quick overview, we have three main outputs. And the first one is an online toolkit, an employability toolkit for students. And I'm just going to very briefly show that because we're a bit over time now because of this disruption. So the toolkit is basically there to give people information about how they can develop their employability, what kind of situations they might encounter when they go into an interview, or what then they may want to think of when they start looking for a job. So there's a large repository of bits of information, each one with an actionable item attached to it. So we give information and then we say, this is what you can do now. And these are some things that you may want to consider along the way. Another part of the toolkit is case studies and experiences of other autistic graduates. And we've collected them and written them up and again, put them into a format that is quite easily digestible. But if someone then wants to find out some more information and related information, they can. And the third part of the toolkit is what we call a profile builder or a template builder. People can collect and think about themselves, about their preferences, about their strengths, like I said before. And from that information that we collect there, we can then generate templates that can be used to show a potential employer, to draft an email, or to make a little presentation from. So this is the toolkit. The other things, the other two outputs, this is the one that Mitzi will talk about later, is training materials for careers advisors. So I'm not going to talk any more about this. And the same with the third one, we have created 4 guides for careers advisors, but also for academics, employers, and managers in higher education and policymakers. And these guides, again, they have a lot of actionable items in there, things that a professional can do in their daily practice that would make a difference. And we have Claire talking about this later. So our focus today then is on, first of all, promoting this idea of understanding autism and thinking about how inclusive our practice actually is and what else we can do to improve that. Then Mitzi will talk about the training materials, and I think there will be some activity and some trying out of some of the components of those. Claire will talk about the good practice guide for careers advisors. And then we'll also have 2 autistic professionals here who talk a little bit about their personal stories. So without further ado, I'm gonna just finish this and thank you initially for listening to me and to my strange metallic voice over the ether here. And I'm going to hand over straight away to Karen, who's already sitting there smiling and waiting. So let me just stop my screen sharing and I'll put this back on. And Karen, can you, oh yes, you're already sharing, brilliant.
Great, can you see that okay? Is that all right, yes. Mark? I can only see you now, so yes. You can give me a
I can see okay.
Screen. Fantastic.
So quick introduction, Karen Coney from Liverpool John Moores University, and I think you will also be joined by Jack Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
Is he a student or a graduate?
He's a final year student.
Okay, good. So I'm not going to take up any more time, so over to you, Karen. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So yes, as Mark's just mentioned, I'm going to be talking about co-designing career support with autistic student consultants. And as has been said, I'm Karen. I'm a careers and employability consultant at Liverpool John Moores University. I'm also a part-time PhD student based at the Autism Centre for Education and Research at Birmingham University as well. But as mentioned, I'm very thankful to be joined by Jack Fitzpatrick, who is a final year student at John Moores, and he's going to be sharing a bit about his experience. And also, yes, I should add that he has already co-founded a business called Inclusive Environments Limited, so he'll be mentioning about that too. Okay, what I'd like to cover over the next 30 minutes is just a little bit about context, echoing some of what Mark said, so I'll be brief on that section. A little bit on the methodology I've used with the project that I'm going to be talking about, and this is essentially several cycles. The first one was about reconnaissance. I'll mention a bit about that, and what I'm going to focus on is this collaborative phase where I have sort of involved the autistic students themselves as partners and co-designers of the careers support at John Moores. I'm then going to hand over to Jack, who's going to provide a bit of his own sort of perspective, and then finally I'll summarise and talk about the next steps, what's going to come next. So just a brief bit on the context then. I really think it's helpful to remember that, university, the UK government report, but I think it's even much wider acknowledged that universities have a key role in ensuring that individuals can successfully progress to employment after graduation. That's one of the key roles of universities, according to the UK government anyway. We also know, as Mark has just shown, that the number of autistic students in the UK and also internationally is increasing year on year. However, we do also know that autistic graduates have disappointing outcomes when it comes to employment. And this is shown in the literature internationally. And just having a think for a moment, we know this, but that unemployment and underemployment have adverse effects on all individuals. But some of the research shows that autistic individuals who are out of work or underemployed, it has an impact on their mental health, on socioeconomic factors, and even life prospects as well. So something really needs to be done. But I know that I'm speaking to people who are already on side with that. So I just wanted to illustrate one example of this. And again, Mark has mentioned this. The What Happens Next report is something that AGCAS, many of you'll know who that is. It's the professional body of HE-based, higher education-based careers practitioners in the UK. And we look every year at the outcomes of disabled graduates. So what we found in the latest report, there's a new one, the current Disability Task Group are actually working on the 2022 What Happens Next report, so based on the very latest graduate outcomes. So look soon for that. But this is the one that's being published at the moment. And just to show you, the one that I've highlighted in red, when it comes to all disabled graduates, there's disadvantage. The blue at the bottom, the largest part of the bar, each one represents full-time employment. But even if we look at total employment, that's going to the top of this green, we see that this is lower than for those graduates who've not stated that they have a disability. And the red right at the top is unemployment. And again, we can see that's higher for those with a disability. But if we look at disability types, apologies, I appreciate this is a really busy slide, but if I can again just highlight the one that is actually that I want to focus on. When we look at disability type, we see real differentiation. So the one I've highlighted with the red dashed box is this is the outcomes for autistic graduates that took part in the graduate outcomes survey. And what we can see is that they have the lowest levels of full-time employment. But even when we look at total employment, it's still the lowest, followed very shortly by those with 2 or more conditions. And as Mark has mentioned, we suspect, but cannot know, but we think that there'll be quite a few with autism in that bar as well, because it's common for there to be other health conditions or disabilities along with autism, and one other as well that was significantly low. But what I also wanted to highlight particularly about the autism one is those in unemployment, and this is the highest by quite a long way. This is the red part at the top here. So, and we found this year on year. We've been looking at the graduate outcomes for many years, and this is what we find. So clearly there's something that needs to happen and more needs to be done. So just to very briefly talk about my own research and my own sort of practice at John Moores, as mentioned, I'm partway through a PhD, and I've chosen to use action research. So this is an approach to research where you're looking at your own practice with the idea that you're going to improve it and transform your practice, and actually ideally transform those involved with the practice as well. It can have an emancipatory element. But I just really thought I want to start with me and think, what can I do as a careers practitioner in a university, how can I improve what is done to support the autistic students at my university? So this is what I'm looking at. I'm hoping then that there will be, I'll be sharing ideas and understandings that can be used elsewhere as well. That's the idea. So what I did during cycle 1, what I should also say about action research is it has a cyclical approach. But this, in the first sort of part of the research, I just asked a lot of people, what were they already doing? You're kind of trying to assess what's already happening. So that was the first part. And then I used my findings to inform what happened in cycle 2. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. And the idea is that you plan something, which I did, and we acted it out, and we looked at what happened, collected data, and then reflected on that. So that's what I'm going to be sharing, and then reporting on the findings. And then just to let you know the full picture, I'm currently embarking on cycle 3, and this is the stage I'm at. So learning from cycle 2 and moving on. But as mentioned, I'm going to focus on the cycle that has finished, and that's cycle 2. Just to tell you a little bit more about what happened before, I think I'd been supporting autistic students for a number of years, but I thought there's a lot more I could learn from other careers practitioners and also from autistic graduates themselves. I think a key element, and Mark mentioned this as well, that's been a sort of something that's been highly, and a key part of the image project is just that actually consulting and going beyond consulting with the autistic people themselves, because they are the experts and we need to listen to their voices more, I think, as we go forward. So what I did in this phase was to find out, explore with others the felt concerns experienced by different people. So I spoke to a number of autistic graduates, I interviewed them, and also spoke to a number of current sort of careers practitioners at UK universities who were running mentoring programs and tailored workshops and other sort of projects to find out what were they learning, what were the challenges, what were some of the success stories as well. And then I used all of that findings, all of the findings from that to go on to cycle 2, which is what I'd like to just share a few minutes, because this has been the highlight so far for me. And the key element has been the participatory sort of part of that. We're actually so what I did to start with, I started with a survey of all the autistic students at John Moores and asked them kind of a series of questions, just like, what do you want from careers? What are some of the things that would be helpful? What are your main sort of concerns, challenges, and so on? And then also sent out with that survey questionnaire an invitation to be more involved as an autistic student consultant. So as a result of that, I had recruited 6 autistic student consultants, and Jack is one of those. And so you'll hear from him in a moment. And basically what we did was I asked them, said they could be as involved or as they liked. Asked them how they wanted to communicate with me. Some chose to do it through a focus group. 3 did the focus group option, and 1 wanted to speak to me on a one-to-one basis, and 2 wanted to participate by email. And so using this different way of communicating, we first of all analysed the survey results from all of the autistic students that had responded, and used that to plan a sort of programme of support. And what I found was that listening to the autistic students just really helped me in all sorts of ways, but I'll mention that in a minute. What we came up with was a series of workshops, and actually in some ways it was quite comforting to know that some of the things I assumed would come up did actually come up. One of the key areas was around disclosure, which is a term that some in the disability community are not quite so comfortable with, because it has connotations of sharing something that's sort of having to admit to something you might not be proud of, and so we want to move away from that, but it's just the legal term. So sometimes we now talk about sharing information about your autism with an employer, but people had questions around that area and what could you ask for and when. Another key area was about hearing from the autistic graduates themselves, and this so again echoes what Mark was saying about case studies and how helpful it is for us all to learn from the stories of others. So what I did for this one was I sort of brought 3 autistic graduates from a range. 1 was self-employed, 1 had gone to further study after having some time in work, and another was in a different graduate job, and they were really helpful for sharing actually their sort of strategies for success, some of the challenges they'd had along the way, and so on. And the third area was around preparation for interviews. And again, I got an autistic speaker, a successful lawyer in London, to talk about how she copes with interview nerves and how she prepares for that. And so for each of these, we actually, what was particularly helpful were some of the inclusive elements suggested by the consultants themselves. So we did these online, we had no choice about the online element, it was last year during lockdown, but actually some of the things that they suggested, like, well, you know, so that actually, again, were a good practice around sort of providing a transcript, having it recorded, but having the reasons for it, we know that that's good practice, but actually, you know, sort of getting insights into, well, actually, some people don't want to be in a live workshop or a webinar, but would, you know, appreciate getting to look at it later. And also having opportunities for anonymous questioning. One in particular, if the consultants was just saying, you know, I get really nervous. I've got lots of questions, but I don't want to ask them in front of others. If you know, sort of based on previous experiences, actually, of that being difficult. So actually, some of those elements were particularly helpful. Just to very quickly move on, some of the things that were great were the we did before and after surveys from these for these workshops, these online workshops. So so we had some really positive feedback about the speakers, about hearing from those who'd shared that they had autism and how it resonated. Yeah, some people had taken on the tips. And one, you know, so some were saying actually networking is really what struck me. So that was brilliant, and I felt there'd been like a positive shift for those that were there in terms of understanding about the workplace and what their next steps should be. I think even more exciting has been what I've called the ripple effect, the ongoing impact of this project so far. So having sort of after the workshops, I sort of I asked them to sort of provide feedback on each of the workshops, but then also afterwards, at the end of the academic year, I sort of interviewed each one again and asked them, well, what's it been like for you? And a number of them had actually been sort of, you know, sort of mentioned that they'd become more aware of what they were capable of, which was great. And also two of them mentioned that actually it really sort of like confirmed or inspired them that they wanted to be involved with this whole idea of promoting inclusion and you know, diversity and equality, and particularly thinking about the workplace going forwards as well, which was just great to hear. Throughout this, I'd had a critical friend, so someone who was an academic who had a real concern for autistic students, through her own personal sort of family situation, actually. And she was great at sort of just being someone for me to bounce ideas off, and also for just to coming along and being that second pair of hands at some of the webinars and also, but actually speaking to her at the end, she was saying, I didn't realize how powerful it would be to involve the autistic students in this way, where they were planning and, you know, co-collaborators throughout. And she said, I'm definitely going to take that back to my school. And they're called schools at John Moores, the School of Sport and Exercise Science, and put that in place when it comes to teaching and learning as well. For me, I just felt it was particularly helpful. It increased my understanding through having all these conversations with the student consultants at each stage and you know, asking them for advice on everything from how should we advertise this to you know, kind of what kind of, you know, what do you think of these questions for the feedback, and it just gave me confidence that I was, you know, sort of doing things in the best possible way. And just kind of, yeah, I think it had an empowering impact on me as well, thinking, okay, this is how we can make a difference for autistic students. And then actually, I'd even say, and this is a big close, I'm quite cautious with this, but I can see that there are some impacts within John Moores, because quite a few of us have gone on to be involved in a disability employability group. So I've kind of got that going and recruited my critical friend and the academics come along. Jack is involved with this, and one of the other consultants who happens to also be the disability part-time officer for the student union, and we've got other people involved as well, some the EDI manager, people from corporate comms, and we're actually putting on a disability careers event later this month. And I think what we can see is that actually, as we're doing more and we can see the value of it, it's just leading to and building these connections with each other throughout the university. It's really helping to kind of gather momentum with this for the good of other students, which is I'm really excited about. So I think this just really ties in with some of the aims of this participatory action research, which is, you know, the cyclical approach. That the whole aim is to produce understanding, first of all, of me and what I can do, but then for others as well, it's also about promoting change, and finally it's about empowering people. And I think as I'm thinking back about last year and the cycle, I'm really seeing hints of that, about that empowering people, and I think it's just really confirmed to me that this is the way to do this. And so yes, I'm very excited about passing that on too. I've spoken for long enough now. I'm going to pass over to Jack to just share a bit about his own experience and thoughts. So over to you, Jack. I can't see you, but I know you're there.
Hi, Karen. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. So my name's Jack Fitzpatrick. I'm 20 years old and I've got a diagnosis of autism and dyspraxia. I'm currently a third-year student at Liverpool John Moores University studying education studies and inclusion. And as Karen said, I've been a part of her research and also sitting on this steering committee for the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Disabled Students Careers event that we're putting on later on this month. With Karen, in regards to Karen's research and involvement, being a consultant with Karen has been insightful and has allowed me to understand what the transition into employment looks like for many different people on the autism spectrum and their experiences. It's also allowed me to help with impactful changes alongside Karen towards how LJMU's careers offering can be diversified, because I undertook a small internship with them looking at the careers website offering and how can we make this more accessible for disabled students as well, looking at resources and levels of access in terms of accessibility tools as well over the summer. So in terms of work, I conducted a placement last year and it has been very, very positive experience in the workplace. So I had to complete a placement with my university course as part of my degree. And through speaking to many different companies on LinkedIn throughout the pandemic and actually meeting with people in all sorts of different sectors, I managed to, I was let down by many, many people. But eventually I found a brilliant company called Aggregate Industries who were really supportive of myself and the role I was doing during the placement, which was looking at their diversity and inclusion initiatives and what can help to shift the company culture to more tolerance and inclusion. And they provided me with all the resources and personnel that I wanted to interview. And consequently from that, I produced a 5,000-word report for them with 20 recommendations, in which one of my recommendations, the sunflower lanyard that's depicted in the picture there, is being rolled out across the 325 sites UK and Ireland to become, which is this lanyard is an initiative talking about unseen and hidden disabilities, giving people more time in regards to that. And it's actually seen a culture shift within the organisation, but also with COVID-19 and my placement being conducted, it was all remote and I was working from home, working with them, and they accommodated my disabilities absolutely fantastically and provided me with like a line manager mentor type of person who was very, very supportive all the way throughout. And then once I finished with the organisation, they actually offered me a summer internship, which I was being rotated between all of their HR departments, working on some projects which are actually gone live, some of them within the organisation. So it's been a fantastic, positive experience. And given I'd never worked in any sense before this stage, it really has inspired me to then go on to do some research, in which during my search for placements, I came across an architect and a small group of others that were conducting a research project looking into neurodiversity within FTSE 500 companies. And I joined the research team 12 months ago. And from those 12 months, we've had a phenomenal response from FTSE 500 companies, BAE Systems, Spotify, Bacardi, A2 Dominion Group. We've spoken with so many major multinational corporations that they were actually asking us to do some consultancy for them. And from that, it's led to the development of a company called Inclusive Environments Limited, in which I'm in partnership with a 25-year time-served architect, Gillian Burgess, who's also neurodiverse herself, because 5 years ago she collapsed at work in a big architecture firm that she was working with, and she was diagnosed with a brain tumour, and the architecture firm couldn't really accommodate her, and making her basically forcing her into a corner because because she couldn't go on site, the health and safety implications associated with that, because she could collapse or have seizures again. It was uncertain. So she then decided to become quite empowered about disabilities, because suddenly having this disability, and we then started this company to look at allowing all to enable their to be enabled to fulfill their full potential. And we've been conducting audits and workplace strategy and looking at the inclusive design of buildings to make sure that all feel comfortable when coming to work, and this is bespoke to clients' needs. So this is what has been a phenomenal journey, which has enabled me to go into the world of work and also be treated as an equal and feel included within society as well. So it's been brilliant. It's been an amazing 12 months that I've worked with both of these companies and founded this one myself. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack. I can't believe you've done all of that while studying full time as well, and being involved in my small project, and yes, being involved in the disability employability group and helping to organise this event as well. It's incredible. Thank you, Jack. That's really helpful. So just to finish off our section, I just wanted to do a quick summary. So as mentioned, finished cycle 2 and analysing all of that, and I'm actually now embarking on cycle 3 at John Moores University. One of the things we found is that actually only about 10% of the autistic students that are registered at John Moores participated in the project, like, you know, in those online workshops last year. So I'm thinking I really need to see what we can do to reach the other 90%. So this year, cycle 3 has a sort of 3-pronged approach. It's doing online workshops again, but having spoken to the student consultants at the end last year, and also you know, sort of again this year, we've thought about other elements. One that's come up that was really focused was thinking about having an online repository. So we're creating pages on our careers website on disability and then autism in particular, putting on some of the things like the recordings of those autistic graduates from last year and additional sources of information and advice. And in addition, I've been providing training for the people, the careers and advisors in my team that are offering one-to-one support, and that's their main job. And just thinking, actually, there'll be quite a lot of autistic students who just want that one-to-one support. Again, that's already been mentioned by Mark, that quite a lot want that tailored one-to-one support. So I've been providing autism awareness on that as well. And I'm continuing with the sort of involving the autistic student consultants, because that's been so helpful. It's a challenge, and I would say one of the things is that having a participatory approach, it's quite a lot of work in terms of just all the emails and coordination that's involved. There's a lot of juggling, you know, on top of the job, but actually I'm really convinced that it is the way forward, because it's produced such helpful understanding. One of the other sort of findings so far has been about it's a challenge bringing about change in higher education. And when I speak to people at other universities, it's quite similar. I've also worked at a couple of other institutions and have seen that change just takes a long time. There can be resistance as well. So that's one of the things that I'm grappling with. But I feel that after I've been at John Moores for 2.5 years now, and I'm actually starting to see things happen. But some of the critical success factors, I would say, one of them is just absolutely seek the student voice. When planning support, how can we know what's right if we don't ask those that we're seeking to support? Another thing, bearing in mind the challenge that I've just said about bringing about change, and often if you are a careers practitioner or another practitioner who's seeking to support autistic students to prepare for what happens after university, you might be the only person in your university and in your team doing that. So it can be quite a lonely role. And I would say finding like-minded colleagues, whether that's within a careers team or a disability service or beyond, like in my case with finding an academic who just cared about the same thing, was really passionate about that. Finding people to bounce ideas off and work with is really helpful. And I would say, I think to the sort of qualities that have really helped me is, one is resilience. I've had to develop that quite a lot, as things have not always come about at the speed and in the way that I would want. And also being curious, always asking questions from everyone that you work with has really helped me too. And just very finally, if you'd like to know more, I haven't mentioned this, but actually one of the things that's come about from and part of the ripple effect is that actually we got asked to, as part of Disability History Month, which this year is starting on the 18th of November, we were asked, Jack and I and a couple of others, the Pro Vice Chancellor actually, and another student, to produce a podcast. And this is about what does disability look like, and particularly with a focus on hidden disability, sort of in 2021. So if you want it, it's called the 1823 podcast. That's the year that John Moores started, and then that will be released shortly. If you want to know more about Cycle 1, I've actually had it recently published in a journal article, and that's there. I will share these slides at the end. And I think what I'd really recommend is that you have a look at as well at the graduate outcomes for disabled graduates, and the AGCAS What Happens Next reports that are released every year are a really good source of information about that. As mentioned, this is a link to the latest one at the moment, but I know that there's a new one coming out very soon. So at the start, it'll be early 2022. So look out for that as well. They are available and you can just Google them. I'm going to finish there. Thanks ever so much for listening. And I'm going to pass back to Mark now.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Karen, and a big thank you to Jack for sharing all the very inspiring information that you gave us. I think we would like you to have, be one of our case studies, one of the graduate stories that we have, even though you're still at university, but you seem to have done a lot of things already. So I'll get in touch with you. So yeah, thanks very much. I think it was a brilliant start for the day. And now over to Mitzi, who will tell us about the training materials.
Great. Well, one of the main outcomes of this project is trying to come up with training materials that we can share with people who are working directly with students. Now, this is not just careers advisors who work for universities. One of the things that we found out was that universities have got different ways of supporting students with autism. And in the Netherlands where I'm working, one of the things that many of them were doing was working with outside providers who are maybe autism coaches or work finding services of one sort or another. And we didn't want to leave them out. So the materials that we've developed, we think that they can be used by anyone who's advising autistic students or graduates about getting into work. So they should be appropriate for a lot of different kinds of people. The other thing is that the materials we've developed, you can adapt. So basically the training package, which I'm going to show you a little bit of today, it's still being finished in terms of the design, but it's actually looking pretty good. We have a set of slides, so a PowerPoint presentation, and at the end of that, and it's been translated into 5 languages, which is also nice, you can include resources that you know about. So for instance, you could have a slide saying, at our university, here's where students start. They might come to you or they might come to the disability office. How can they get through the system at your university to be getting the services that they need? You can have a slide about how things work in your local area. So where would they go to, for instance, get a personal budget, which isn't the possibility in every country, but in the UK and in the Netherlands, there is that possibility of having a personal budget, which can help to pay for an autism coach or for a support worker or someone that they may need. In the UK, how can you register for access to work? A scheme that a lot of employers don't even know about, but can offer the support that someone needs to get into a job and have the support they need in the job without costing extra money to the employer, which can be a powerful incentive especially for working with some people who might have more difficulties on the job than others, but who have a fantastic array of skills. And I can think of a number of people that I've met and worked with over the years who fall into that category, where they really needed that extra support and employers were thinking, I don't know about that. I don't have something in place that can provide that. Access to work can, and other countries have similar programs that students can use. So I'm going to attempt to share with you the slides. Let's see if I can do that. Browse my computer. I have so much stuff on here. Okay. Hopefully that's going to come up and you'll be able to see it. It's loading very slowly because the other thing is that the slides actually include embedded videos. And those videos we made some ourselves, acting out kind of typical scenarios that people see. But also we use some videos that are available from YouTube or Vimeo, things that you can pick and choose. You could even put your own videos in if you'd like, but they're going to take a little while to load. I think in the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit about what goes with them. We have a literal script that goes with the slides. So if you're one of those people who thinks, presentations are not my thing, and I worry about getting through everything in time, we've timed the script and we've timed the slides so that you can use these for, say, a twilight session at your work, or as part of a larger training program that you do for new hires, for people when they're first coming on. You could include some material of your own, and you could make sure that it fits in with other parts of your training. We also have some standalone materials. We have fact sheets, which you could print and pass out, or you could put them on your website, or you could email them to your staff. And we'll have some extra resources on our website as well. So that might be things like interviews with people. Someone like Jack, for instance, would be really good to have an interview with, and other kinds of case studies that you can use to kind of move things together. I think with your staff, the most important aspect of this is that it isn't just, okay, here's a PowerPoint presentation. We're going to tell you about autism. Yes, we have those slides. Most of you probably don't need them, but some people do. But we also have activities, and so that's where I'm going to take you as soon as these slides load, so you can see the kind of interactive things that we would like people to do. And we have tested these. Oh, it's telling me my slides are coming online, which is good. Should be any time now. Here they come. So I'm going to walk you through the package quickly. I'm not going to actually do the presentation. That would take much too much time. But we've got sort of an overview. This is what we're going to do in our training. And you can see that we have those basic facts slides. We have success stories, but those success stories also talk about some of the barriers that people encountered in trying to find work, whether those were with the employer or with the HR department, which doesn't always do what employers like. That's another finding. And the practical activities that we can use. And then we wind up with some key principles and then those resources slides, which we hope you will add to. Each country has added some resources that they knew about at the national level, but you probably know about some others, so you can adapt these for your own purposes. This is the boring stuff, but it has to be done. Let's see, will it let me continue on through? Trying to get there, and it's loading very slowly. There we go. So we have information about the students, and then we have activities like this one, which might seem a funny thing. Why do we ask why? Why do we do this? But we've actually found this is a really powerful activity. Trying to get people to understand what their motivation is for doing things a little differently. And we want careers advisors to do things a little differently. We want them to understand why it's important to look at this particular group as a specific group, in the same way that in the past they might have looked at minority ethnic students on campus, because we know they face barriers in finding employment, or women in STEM, for example. You know, are there things that need to be thought about for that specific group? We think this is another group where, because of the employment statistics and because of what we've heard from students and graduates, they do need a different approach and a little bit of extra attention so that we can help them to overcome some of the barriers that they face in the job market. This exercise, we asked people to go through it in pairs, and you would be surprised at some of the things that come out. And they help to motivate everybody. We then have some videos. This is about an autistic person who found a job in a workplace that is specialist. The reason we start with this is because that isn't what most students want. They don't want an autism-specific program at work. They don't want an autism-specific workplace. They want a mainstream placement, and they've done a mainstream course, so there's no reason that they can't. But for some students, this approach can be good. Oh, no, I don't want it to play, though. And then we talk about the profile of the people that you see. It's not showing me the slides that I think I am on. There we go. And then we have some real success stories, and these are actually from students who were interviewed as part of our project in the Netherlands, so I know who they are. The kinds of barriers that we found were different in different career fields. We think that's important to highlight in the training, and that's a thing that you might want to then open up a discussion about. Have you already seen that? Are students from certain programs getting into work much easier, and students from others are not? This might indicate something that you could talk to the program about, for instance, or it could be something that's specific to the field. In a general way, we found that students in STEM fields who had autism were having an easier time of finding work. Their skills are highly in demand. There may be more understanding in some of those workplaces. It could be that there's just more provision in those courses. We don't know what all the factors are, and it's probably different at every university in every country. We found that students who were in humanities courses were experiencing more barriers to finding work, not because they hadn't done a fantastic job in their degree, but those barriers appeared to be mainly in the field itself. A little bit more focus on you should be like everyone else in the team, or on teamwork in general, and assumptions that people with autism wouldn't fit well in a team or wouldn't be able to do teamwork, and yet we know our students have been doing it all through their courses. So that indicates some directions for working with HR to remove some of those barriers, and with thinking about whether there are things that have been put in place in terms of professional requirements that could form a barrier. I know that in the Netherlands, and I also heard this when I was working in England, people moving into teaching, like our first case study, often faced some particular barriers around fitting into the workplace and fitness for work assessments and other things where there seemed to be some potential discrimination going on. Luckily, this particular student found a really good fit, and my understanding is she is now in full-time work. I just heard that recently as a curriculum developer, and that suits her right down to the ground. Other students get through the interview really easily, but they need to have a way of talking about the adjustments that they need in the workplace. And for the second case study, he had advice on one way of doing that that worked really well for him. I think for everyone it's a little different, but this is something students really wanted us to focus on. Then we've got another activity where we ask small groups of trainees or people in your workplace to think about specific cases and how they would come up with a way of supporting this student. Sometimes you can think of someone who you actually have as a client who meets this profile, and that can make it even more personal as a way to speak about it. And we've got a couple of these. This is another case. We actually had this happen with someone where in the new workplace, they wanted this new person, brand new on the job, to do their own presentation on autism. We don't recommend this for students in schools, and we definitely don't recommend it in the workplace. It really puts the person on the spot. But as a new hire, he has to think about how he's going to respond to this request. And we want you to talk about how you would work through a case like that with your graduate. And then yet another one. This is a typical one for careers advisors. For some of you in other roles, this won't apply. You can just take it out of your presentation. But organizing a job fair that's really inclusive. And I don't know about you, but I hate job fairs. I've been between jobs for the last couple of months, so I have gone to a couple. I find them absolutely horrible. And I really wish that the kinds of things that make them better for autistic applicants would be done for all of us. You probably have people you're working with who already have some really good ideas about how to improve it. We've also got some recommendations in the Good Practices Guide for Careers Advisors that you could bring into this. You could provide that to all of the attendees, for instance, either before or after your training session. Yeah, quiet time at the start of the fair, that just popped up in the chat. I think that's great. And to just have a de-stress space wherever anyone can go. This doesn't need to be autism specific. I think many people need it. Another really good practice, which I know is in the guide because it came from one of our careers advisors, was to have someone who's kind of going around the outside of the action, you know, around the outside of the tables and looking for that applicant who's holding back, who seems stressed, who seems like they might need support, and possibly even introducing that person to a recruiter, because having that person who, you know, can be a bridge between you and the person at the table, that can really help. And whether that person is one of your clients or not might not matter. It doesn't matter whether they have a diagnosis. It just matters that they're holding back. They're worried about how to get in. And we've got a lot of other tips in the Good Practices Guide, but I think you can often generate them in an activity like this. Anytime you've got a group of people who are together in the room, you've got a lot of knowledge, and everyone a little bit more knowledge to share. And we've got a pause built in. That's important. We have a lot of tips about what needs to happen in your careers advice practice. Establishing trust can be really difficult with young people who've been let down in the past. And I think that's a common experience with students and graduates with autism. They've been promised things by this program, that person, that weren't delivered. You need to be the exception to that and make sure that what you say you will do, you do, and that you do what you'll say. Making the goals with your client or with your student so that you're clear on what it is that they want to get out of your careers advice practice. They may not want the standard offer. They may need something that's very specific to them. And you also need to think about how you're going to measure those outcomes, because that's one of the ways that we build trust. If you say, we're going to do these 3 things together, you know, we're going to improve your CV, we're going to get through some job applications and see how that goes, or maybe we're going to work on your interview skills, whatever it is that the client says to you, this is what I need help with. You want to write those things down together so that you can check that you've actually done those things and that nothing is left out. That builds trust because you've done what you said you'd do. And you can revise those goals as time goes on. We've got a lot of little films that we've built in. You can see who's starring in this one. And, you know, I'm not going to show them to you, but they're pretty fun and a little bit silly. We want you to also think about the environment in which your meetings take place. It's important, especially for autistic students, but really for anyone that you might work with, that you've planned the environment of the meeting so that sensory issues are not something that is going to get in the way. And that can be different for everyone with autism. So that means you need to talk to them about it first. Being flexible about how you meet with people, whether it's an in-person meeting in your office, which a lot of people definitely prefer, or whether it might be online. We've had students who said, I have not got the concentration right now because I'm in the last year of my course. It's very busy. We've had people who were supported via WhatsApp. It's not my thing, but it might be right for your student. Or just being able to exchange emails on a regular basis, even though you're maybe not seeing each other on a regular basis. You've done, maybe you're only allowed 6 sessions at your university, but saying, I'm open to that continued communication and being flexible enough to maybe add that 7th session when they really need it after they've had a job interview. And being clear in how you communicate. And I have a terrible video here of me where I'm being as unclear as I possibly can be. And we'd like you to critique how that goes. We have some ideas about what clear communication might be, and the video illustrates all the things you shouldn't do. And we talk about using a strengths-based approach because that is the best way for every client, not just clients with autism. When you go into a job finding situation, you want to be confident about what it is that you're presenting about yourself. If what you're worried about is my diagnosis, or how will they perceive me, or am I up to the job, you're not going to come across with the confidence that you need to be able to get the job. So we want students to recognize their own strengths and to have stories they can tell about them so that that becomes the focus of the job interview, and also of cover letters, CVs, all the things that they use to represent themselves. Hey there, I'm glad we could set this meeting up on. That's me, and you don't need to hear that. With making lists with them about taking, for instance, an actual job listing that they're interested in, or that might be the thing they're interested in next year, and going through it to see, are you hitting all the bases, or are there some extra things that you might want to do this year to prepare yourself for being ready for that job? So they might be asking for some skill that isn't being taught on their course, for instance. Where else can they get that? And they might need you to go out of your way a little bit, because we don't always do this, to help them find out, where could you learn, I don't know, a particular software package that isn't one that's being used on the course, but that employers are asking for, or presentation skills, if that isn't a thing that they think is one of their strengths, but it's being asked for, or teaching skills. We see this a lot with master's and PhD students, for instance. They may or may not have had much teaching experience, but the jobs that they're looking at are saying, we expect you to do some teaching. So yeah, external agencies, as someone in the chat is mentioning, can sometimes be a lifesaver with getting those extra skills and also having an extra reference, which can be very important for students with autism who may have focused on their studies and not on the side job, the summer job. They are focused on their studies, and that's great, but they need to have these extra things on their CV if possible. And talking about topics like talking about your diagnosis, talking about the things that you need on the job, dealing with it if stereotypes about autism come up either in the job interview or in those early days on the job. How can we confront that in a careers advice situation so that we've diffused that? We don't have a problem with it later. And working with the other staff at your university, if you're university-based, and with employers. It's a funny thing. Careers advisors, we found out, often have contacts with employers that they're using to, maybe send them some graduates or recommend them as a possible employer, or working with them through job fairs, getting materials from them that they provide to students. But one thing that most careers advisors weren't doing was dealing directly with the disability people at large employers. So the diversity coordinator, for instance, if that's how they deal with it, or with people who might be involved in trainees in general at the company, reaching out to them to make sure that you're on the same page when you're sending them students. And we also found that careers advisors, especially at universities, didn't know a lot about what was out there for job seekers with disabilities. They didn't know about programs in their country. They didn't know about outside agencies in their area that normally provided support. Some of them didn't know about the laws either, you know, what is and isn't allowed in a job interview, like can you ask someone about a diagnosis? Yeah, in most countries that's not allowed during the job interview unless the applicant brings it up as something that they wish to talk about. And so we need to know about that stuff because students want to know. They want to know what to expect. And they want to know what to do if something happens in the interview that isn't on. It's a bit like being a young woman applying. Are they allowed to ask you about your family planning? And we know that it happens, but we know that it shouldn't. And we need for students to have the right words to use when something happens in an interview that shouldn't happen. And these are things that will give students a lot of confidence going forward when they encounter interview situations. And then we end with our basic take-home messages. And this is for you to fill in what you have locally. And I hear there's a kettle going off that I'm going to have to attend to. All sorted. We also have other slides for local resources. These are things in your city, in your county. And for national resources, this is one that we filled out for the Netherlands, but you can do one for your country. The national resources that you're already aware of that provide some kind of support for autistic adults that is specific to work. We have quite a few. We aren't recommending them or saying they're good. We're just saying these are places you could check out. But you may know some that you really can recommend, services or agencies that you've worked with, that you know named people at, that you would feel really comfortable referring someone to. So feel free to add or delete if you see someone on the list for your country that you think, I don't want to send you down that road, or yes, this is the place that might be good for you. You can also include these kinds of resources. So books that really meet that young job seeker market, that especially for maybe people who have a new diagnosis, student organizations or organizations of adults with autism, which is where we start ours. We worked with this organization throughout. And then we have links to our own resources, of course. And everything is there for you to be able to use it. Now I'm going to stop sharing this material if I can. I'm always terrible at using Teams. Let's see, maybe it will let me stop sharing. Oh, how do I do this? There, stop presenting. Yes, there we go. I think that brings us back to the main screen. I think at this point, I'd like to just be open for questions you might have because there's been a lot going on in the chat. Just to mention again that we have a script that goes with the slides and we have additional material. And I think that, you know, we could bring a lot more. I see lots of things in the chat and including from people who are from different backgrounds. I wondered if, are we able to have people raise hands if they'd like to ask a question directly? And can somebody help me see if someone has a question directly and unmute them? Because I would be really up for answering them.
Yeah, I think everyone can raise hands.
I think we can unmute ourselves, but I'm an Aspie myself, and I've found that the only places that I get a lot of resources from are Australia and the USA.
I think that's a good reason for anyone who's using this training package to really take some time before they do the training and find out what is out there in their country. There's often some real hidden gems, but I have to also say, I don't want to see a laundry list of everything you found with Google. You really need to talk to the organization and find out, are they working with graduates? Because there are organizations that help people with autism find work, but that's not their group. You know, they're working with older people, or they're working with people who only have a secondary school education, or they're working with people who have a significantly higher level of need, who may also have intellectual disabilities. And so they're not the place you want to send your extremely bright computer science graduate. They're not going to be helpful because they don't have those job contacts. There's nothing worse than being a university graduate and hearing, oh, we've got a, you know, like an autism job fair, and you go there and it's all Sainsbury's and, you know, logistics work. And you're thinking, what did I do my bachelor's for? I could have worked at Sainsbury's when I was 15. So you want somebody who really understands the work field and who can definitely give you the sort of support that you need to be able to get your graduates into work. Anybody else have something they want to ask about?
Well, I'm just wondering about careers advisors. I mentioned UCAT, which I'm a member of. That's an association for university advisors. They've got zilch on disability, but there you go. What about careers advisors? Because actually, is there any association or professional association? And also, why are so few university careers advisors on the call today?
I think we've actually got quite a few, but it's hard to say. I know in every country there is some kind of association, and I know we looked up the one for the UK. Yeah, there's one. I see some hands going up. Are you wanting to add something, Karen?
Is that all right? I was just going to answer that question as a careers practitioner in the UK. So there's AGCAS is the professional body for careers practitioners in higher education, and we have a disability task group that until recently I was a member of, but after 6 years you have to move on. So that's why I'm not. It's a fantastic group, and actually that's a collection of careers practitioners who are experts in disability who exist to try and help other careers practitioners who are seeking to support disabled students and graduates. So they produce resources and training and sort of just again try and advocate for on behalf of students and graduates and careers practitioners when it comes to policy and government as well. So I'd say that's probably in the UK. If you're based in a university and you're a careers practitioner, that would be a good place to start. And there are, oh, thank you. Yvonne is here. Yvonne is a current member of the AGCAS Disability Task Group. So brilliant. If you want to add anything, Yvonne, but she might be a good person to connect with if you've got any questions.
Super. And I think we've got to make the links with those organizations because they're the ones who reach people at the beginning of their career. They're the ones who do refresher courses. They've got websites that you might be checking in on. And I know that we're going to be very motivated to try to make sure our resources are linked and visible to their members. I think it's also important just at the university level too, to be in touch with the people who are heads of careers advice and to make sure that they're kind of cascading this information down to the rest of staff. Often we find that at a university, you've got one or two people who specialize in this area, and they might not even be called a careers advisor. At my own university, we found out the people who were giving careers advisors to autistic students were in student support, and a lot of them were actually student psychologists. This is not really their job, but it's what students said they wanted, so they do it. We needed to really make sure they were linked with the standard careers advice people as well, so that they weren't getting sort of contradictory advice from two different departments, or thinking that, oh, well, you're getting that here, so you can't go there. I think this is the silo mentality that happens at a lot of universities. Certain people build expertise and it's not getting shared with their colleagues. And so when they leave, they take all that knowledge with them. So making sure that that training gets out to everybody in the department is super important. I see we've got some more hands up, and I'm not sure how to let them in. So Mary, could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to add that in the UK, outside of I work at a further education office college, but I've also worked in 2 universities previously, and I've worked in schools, and in the work-based learning sector as well. So in the UK, as the colleague was saying, ADCAS is for HE, but outside of HE, we have the Careers Development Institute, and that is for careers advisors in the UK. So in schools and colleges now, the government has mandated that students 16 to 19 and those with an educational healthcare plan, so that's special needs, but not all special needs because it's hard to get one of those, need to have independent careers advice from a CDI registered careers practitioner who has to be at a certain grade. I won't go through all the standards, but yeah, you have to be kind of professionally qualified. And so the CDI performs the function for education outside of HE. But the CDI and ICAS work together, and there are a number of initiatives where they're all working together to lobby the government on various different things. So that's just give you context. My question would be, certainly in further education, one of our challenges is that as well as learners may have, having disabilities, neurodiversity, whatever, they also come with other challenges, often to do with social disadvantage. So it's not just, so they don't have the capital, and they don't have the kind of network. They're often from a family where maybe they're in a single parent family where that parent is working 3 jobs to try and keep food on the table. That's really typical. And so that presents, many of my learners have that anyway. But obviously on top with their disability, that presents additional challenges. And what I've found is that you're right about the whole Sainsbury's thing. We run a supported learning program here. So for the lower level students, there actually is more provision. What I find, the ones that are in the middle, they may be not going to get to university, but they're not at the lower level. But it's finding opportunities for them, things they want to do, apprenticeships and things like that. And it's really hard to find things that are suitable. And that's a real challenge. And also I'm finding a lot of students from social disadvantage don't necessarily want to go to university. I know I worked in widening participation before, so I'm aware of all of that, but partly because of the debt, and some of them because they've seen peers go to university but not have the wage uplift, and so then they kind of say, I'd rather do an apprenticeship. Anyway, that's a lot in one comment, but I just thought I'd make one big comment. So I hope that's
totally understand where they're coming from. Because I have an autistic son myself who finished university years ago. He's now 30. He's still not had a job. So it's not always that you go to university and hey presto, they're falling all over you. And I don't find that the services are necessarily there. And the older you get, the harder they are to get. So many services serve only a youth age group, whether they're university, further ed, or just coming out of secondary or special education. They'll say, okay, up to age 25. So I think we need some services uplift here. We need to make sure that this message is getting through loud and clear. Definitely. That opportunities need to be out there. Working with your local council can actually be really powerful, because that's where a lot of those middle level jobs are. That person who could be doing an office job, They do a bit of typing, they do some filing, they're helping with working with people, working in a school, not as a teacher, but, you know, doing some other things that need to happen in schools. Those are jobs that you don't have to go to university for, but we often lack the direct links with people at the council who can really help with getting people in to work experience. That's another thing we found, even with our university students, that a lot of them had not done an internship unless it was absolutely required in their course. And even then, they may not have gotten out of it what other students got out of an internship. I want to call on Julie, who's had her hand up for ages, because I know we're going to run out of time soon. Julie, could you ask your question? Are you there, Julie? I'm going to unmute you and see if that works. It's Julie Porter. Uh-oh, don't have a question now. That's okay. Is there someone else who does have a question?
Well, I just remember the what was called the guaranteed interview scheme.
Oh, that doesn't actually happen, Peter. We'd like to say that it does, but we know that employers tell lies that they do this. I hate to say it as bluntly as that, but councils are good about it, and most other employers are not.
What about this logo I'm seeing on disability confident employers? They've got the badge. If you rock up to an interview with them and you tell them about your disabilities, they revert to treating you as feeble-minded.
Yes, we're aware this happens, and I know a number of people that it's too. I see that Kath Dunn has her hand up, and that might be because she knows something more about this than I do.
Hi, yeah, I was just actually trying to put it in the chat, but I think the answer may be, although please other people feel free to correct me, in the recent announcements around provision for people with autism and also more general disability announcements, there's a suggestion that the Disability Confidence Scheme is going to have a bit of an overhaul, I think, and that's because it's not working. So I think it's a bit of a watch this space, but I know locally with the organisation that I'm supporting at the moment, we're looking at ways of bringing in our members, our autistic members, as experts by experience to kind of try and get involved more in the Disability Confidence Scheme as it currently stands, so that we can try and improve what's there whilst we're waiting to hopefully get involved with what isn't yet there. But we have a really good relationship with the local manager for the Thames Valley area, who within the Jobs Centre within DWP. So that's also a really good contact to build up.
I think a tick mark with no teeth is not the thing we need. We need something that really has a little bit of oomph behind it in the UK. And the same in other countries. We see similar schemes that sometimes work and sometimes don't. I want to finish by saying one thing about the training that I think is really important for those of you who think I'd like to take these materials and use them. We strongly encourage you to do the training alongside people with autism. So please reach out to people in your own organization who have experience of living with neurodiversity. If there isn't someone in your own organization, reach out to an organization of autistic adults, of which there are many, or invite a student. You know, you've got students that you see, invite them to come in and do the training with you, because that makes it real. That is when you hear that, oh, that it used to be called the 2-tick scheme. That 2-tick scheme that you've heard about, let me tell you, it doesn't always work the way you think. Or I had this experience myself. It's not just a case study on paper. It makes it real, it makes it more powerful, and it generates a lot more information and advice that people can use. It's always the best way to deliver a training package like this. In partnership with people with autism. And we know there's lots of people out there who have experience and who can speak with your audience in a way that will really move them to change their practice. So I'm going to leave you with that, and then we're going to move on to the next part. I'm going to turn it back over to Mark.